It was just another grueling shift for Ella Vance, another night of balancing plates and ignoring the whispers of the elite. But a single drop of spilled wine on the wrong table was about to ignite a 22-year-old secret. A billionaire, known as the Shark of Wall Street, looked up, not at the stain, but at the pendant on her chest. His voice was a low growl, cutting through the noise. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his words changing her life and her past forever. The Serafina was not a restaurant, it was a theater, and tonight the performance was a disaster. Eleanor Ella Vance felt the familiar burn in her arches, a dull throb that radiated up her calves. She'd been on her feet for 9 hours, navigating the silent, carpeted war zone of tables populated by people who owned islands. At 22, her life was a repeating cycle of rent, instant noodles, and the smell of expensive food she'd never tasted. Her only luxury, her only link to a past she never knew, was the silver pendant around her neck. It was a complex knot, almost Celtic, worn smooth by her own anxious fingers. It was, she'd been told by the matron at the St. Swithin's orphanage, the only thing she'd been found with. "Table 7, Ella. Now," barked the maître d', his voice a harsh whisper. Table 7 was the bane of her night, a solo diner, brooding in the most expensive corner booth. He'd sent back his soup, too hot, and his wine, not the 1998 vintage he'd clearly requested, though he had. He looked like a man carved from granite, with eyes that matched. Ella knew who he was. Everyone did. Arthur Sinclair, the CEO of Sinclair Holdings, a man who bought and sold companies before breakfast, a recluse, a billionaire, and according to the kitchen gossip, a widower whose grief was as legendary as his fortune. Ella approached, the heavy silver water pitcher cold in her hand. "More water, Mr. Sinclair?" He didn't look up from his phone, just gave a curt, dismissive wave. As she leaned in, her co-worker, Ben, rushed past with a tower of plates, jostling her arm. It happened in slow motion. The pitcher tilted. The ice-cold water didn't just spill, it cascaded across the table, flooding the polished mahogany and splashing directly onto Arthur Sinclair's $5,000 suit. A dead silence fell over the dining room. Ella's blood ran colder than the water. I am so sorry, sir. I'll get towels," she stammered, grabbing napkins, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grip them. "You incompetent," Arthur began, his voice a low growl of thunder. He looked up, his grey eyes flashing with rage. And then they stopped. They weren't looking at her face. They were locked on the pendant, which had swung forward from under her uniform as she leaned over. His rage vanished, replaced by a profound, terrifying shock that paled his face. His hand, fast as a snake, shot out and clamped around her wrist. It wasn't gentle. "No," he whispered. It wasn't to her, it was to himself. "Sir, you're hurting me," Ella pleaded, trying to pull away. He ignored her. With his other hand, he reached out and, with a trembling finger, touched the silver knot. A jolt, like static, seemed to pass between them. "Where?" he said, his voice cracking. "Did you get this?" It was my mother's," Ella stammered, tears of panic and humiliation welling. "Please, sir, let me go." "Your mother?" he breathed, his grip tightening. He looked from the pendant to her face, really looked at her, searching her features, her wide, green eyes, the stubborn set of her chin. "What was her name?" I don't know," Ella admitted, the old shame stinging. "I'm an orphan. It was left with me." Arthur Sinclair released her wrist as if he'd been burned. He slumped back in the booth, his entire body shaking. The restaurant, the spilled water, the ruined suit. It all disappeared. He looked like a man seeing a ghost. "Get out," he whispered. "Sir, get out," he roared, slamming a fist on the table. The maitre d' was suddenly there, pulling Ella away. "You're fired, Vance! Get your things!" Ella was dragged toward the kitchen, her heart pounding. But as she was pulled away, she heard Arthur Sinclair's voice, not angry this time, but broken, a hollow whisper that would haunt her. "Isabella, can it be? Are you her daughter?" Ella didn't get her things. She ran. She burst through the employee exit into the alley, gasping for the cold November air, her cheap coat clutched in her hands. The humiliation was a physical weight, but it was overshadowed by the terror and confusion of the billionaire's words. "Are you her daughter? Whose daughter? What did he see in that simple piece of silver?" She sank onto a stack of flattened cardboard boxes, her shift finally over, her job gone. The $300 she had in her bank account wouldn't cover next week's rent. The panic was so acute it threatened to suffocate her. She rubbed the pendant. It was her armor, her only connection. Now, even that was a source of confusion. Meanwhile, inside the Serafina, Arthur Sinclair was not eating. He was staring at the water-soaked table. "Marcus," he said into his phone, his voice flat. His chief legal counsel and head of operations, Marcus Thorne, picked up on the first ring, as he always did. "Arthur, is everything all right? I need a name. Eleanor Vance, waitress at the Serafina. I want everything. Birth records, school records, blood type, her favorite color, everything. I want it by morning." "May I ask what this is regarding, Arthur? Is it a legal matter?" Marcus's voice was smooth, efficient, and devoid of emotion. Arthur hesitated. She was wearing Isabella's pendant. A long silence stretched down the line. Marcus Thorne was the only living person, besides Arthur's mother, who knew the full story. "Arthur, that's not possible," Marcus said carefully. "Isabella's belongings were lost. The pendant was lost with her." "I'm looking at a puddle of water that says otherwise," Arthur snapped. "She said she was an orphan, that it was left with her. Do it, Marcus. Find out who she is." He hung up and signaled for the bill, ignoring the maitre d's effusive apologies. He left a $10,000 tip on the table and walked out, his mind not on the restaurant, but 23 years in the past. He had been 25, the heir to the Sinclair empire, and she was Isabella Vance, a scholarship art student who painted with a fire that matched her spirit. His mother, Genevieve Sinclair, had called her a penniless distraction. To Arthur, she was life itself. The pendant was his. He'd commissioned it from a small private jeweler in Italy, a lover's knot locket, designed from an old sketch. He gave it to her the night he proposed, hidden in a box of paints. "It's so no matter where we are," he'd told her, "we are bound." Then came the fight. His mother. The ultimatum. "Choose the family, Arthur, or you get nothing. This artist will ruin us." He'd chosen Isabella. He'd told his mother he was renouncing his inheritance. He was going to run away with her. They were going to meet at their cottage in the Hamptons. He packed a bag, ready to start a new, poorer, happier life. He never made it. His mother's men intercepted him. "A tragedy," they'd said. "An accident." Isabella, newly pregnant with their child, had apparently panicked. She'd taken his sports car, lost control on the coastal highway, and plunged into the ocean. No car was recovered. No body. Just a presumed death. Arthur had been broken. He'd been forced back into the family business, a hollow shell of the man he was. The grief had hardened him, turning him into the shark the world knew today. He'd believed for 22 years that his love and his unborn child were dust at the bottom of the Atlantic. Until tonight. Tonight, a 22-year-old waitress with Isabella's defiant green eyes and her stubborn chin had spilled water on him, wearing a pendant that could not possibly exist. By 7 a.m., Marcus Thorne was standing in Arthur Sinclair's penthouse office. The view over Central Park was pristine, but the mood was stormy. "Her name is Eleanor Ella Vance," Marcus said, opening a sleek, dark blue folder. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed, his loyalty to the Sinclair family absolute. "She is, as she said, an orphan, dropped at the St. Swithin's orphanage on November 12th, 2003, approximately 1 week old. No note, no file, just a name pinned to her blanket and the pendant you described." Arthur stared at the date. It was 8 months after Isabella's accident. The timeline made no sense. "She was in the foster system until she aged out at 18, Marcus continued. "No criminal record, spotty employment. Currently enrolled in night classes at community college for restaurant management. She lives in a 5th-floor walk-up in a bad part of Brooklyn. She was, as of last night, fired." "Fired?" Arthur growled. "The maitre d' took it upon himself. I took the liberty of reversing that decision. The Serafina's management has been informed that Miss Vance is an associate of yours and is to be given paid leave, effective immediately." "Good," Arthur said, rubbing his temples. "An orphan. 8 months later. It doesn't add up." "Arthur," Marcus said gently, "I knew Isabella. The girl, she doesn't look like her." "She has her eyes," Arthur shot back, defensive. "And the pendant, Marcus, the jeweler, old Giuseppe, he swore he broke the mold. It was one of a kind. Pendants can be copied. Grief can make us see ghosts, old friend." "I am not grieving," Arthur snapped. "I am investigating." "What about the accident?" Marcus paled slightly. "The police reports were clear. A witness saw the car go over the cliff." "A witness paid by whom, Marcus?" Arthur's voice was dangerously quiet. "My mother, perhaps." "Mrs. Sinclair is a formidable woman," Marcus allowed, "but she would not." "She would," Arthur interrupted. "She would. Arrange a meeting with Miss Vance. Here, today. And Marcus, get me the original police report on Isabella's accident. All of it. The sealed parts." Marcus nodded, but his face was tight. "There is one more thing. Your mother is here. She's in the drawing room. She heard about the incident at the restaurant." Arthur's blood ran cold. Of course she had. The Serafina's owner was on his mother's charity board. Genevieve Sinclair was seated on a priceless antique chaise, sipping tea. She was a vision in silver silk, her white hair coiffed perfectly, her eyes as sharp and cold as the November air. "Arthur, darling," she said, not bothering to stand. "Causing a scene at the Serafina? How theatrical. You fired a waitress for spilling water? A bit gauche, even for you. I didn't fire her, mother. And you know why you're here. The pendant." Genevieve's teacup clinked softly in its saucer. She held it steady. "Ah, yes. The trinket. Marcus called me. He's so wonderfully thorough. Was it her, mother? Was it Isabella's?" Genevieve laughed, a sound like tiny, shattering icicles. "Isabella? That grasping little artist? Arthur, she died 22 years ago. She took your car, your money, and drove herself off a cliff. She was careless, and she paid the price. This girl, this waitress, is a nobody. A coincidence. It was a one-of-a-kind piece, mother." "Nothing is one of a kind for someone with enough money, Arthur. This girl has clearly done her research. She sees a grieving billionaire, finds a picture of his dead love, copies an old piece of jewelry, and arranges a chance encounter. She's a con artist, plain and simple, and you, blinded by your pathological need to live in the past, are falling for it. She stood, adjusting her pearls. I've already spoken to Marcus. He's handling it. Handling what? He's offering the girl a settlement, a generous one, $50,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear. It's clean, Arthur. By tonight, this will all be a bad memory. Arthur stared at his mother, the same cold, pragmatic cruelty that had defined his entire life. No, he said. No? Genevieve raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. No settlement, no NDA. I'm bringing her here. I'm going to find out the truth. The truth, Genevieve scoffed, is that you are a fool. You are my son, and you are the CEO of this company. But you are still a sentimental fool. Handle this, Arthur, or I will. She swept from the room, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken threats in her wake. Arthur turned to the window, the city blurred below him. He had faced down corporate raiders and hostile governments. Why did this woman, his own mother, still terrify him? Marcus, he said, hitting the intercom, cancel the settlement offer and double the security on that girl. I think my mother just threatened her. Ella was woken by a pounding on her apartment door. Her first thought was the landlord, coming to demand the rent she didn't have. She looked through the peephole and saw two men in dark suits. Miss Vance? Eleanor Vance, one called. Her heart hammered. This was it. They were going to hurt her. The billionaire was angry. She backed away from the door. Miss Vance, we are private security, hired by Mr. Arthur Sinclair for your protection. He has requested a meeting. Please, we mean you no harm. Protection? A black SUV, smoother and quieter than any car she'd ever been in, drove her across the bridge and into the sky. Arthur Sinclair's penthouse was less an apartment and more a sterile, glass-walled fortress. Arthur was waiting for her, standing before a wall of windows. He looked haggard. Miss Vance, Ella, thank you for coming. I didn't have much of a choice, Ella said, clutching her denim jacket. You fired me. Your mother tried to pay me off. Arthur winced. You spoke to my mother? No. A man named Marcus Thorne called me, offered me $50,000 to forget I ever met you and give him my necklace. Rage, pure and hot, flashed in Arthur's eyes. He did that after I told him not to. My apologies. Marcus has been reassigned. In truth, Marcus was standing outside the door, having received the dressing down of his life. What do you want? Ella asked, tired. The truth. Arthur walked to a safe, hidden behind a modern painting. He pulled out a small, velvet-covered box. Inside, on a bed of faded silk, was a locket. It was identical to hers. No, Ella breathed, stepping forward. Not identical, Arthur said. He pressed a hidden clasp, and the locket opened. It was empty. It's a set. Two halves of a whole. I gave this one to a woman named Isabella Vance, the love of my life. My locket was supposed to hold her picture. Hers was supposed to hold mine. He looked at Ella, his eyes desperate. She died. Or, I was told she died. In a car accident, 22 years ago. She was pregnant with my child. The room tilted. Ella steadied herself on a chair. Me? Your age is right. The pendant is... It's impossible. But it's here. I need to know, Ella. I need to know if the last 22 years of my life have been a lie. How? She whispered. A DNA test. A private one. Here. Now. I've had a doctor from the Caduceus Bryant Clinic on standby. It's the most secure private lab in the country. They will take our samples, run them, and we will have an answer in 24 hours. No one but us will know. Ella looked at the man before her. He wasn't a shark. He was just a man, as lost as she was. What if I'm not her? Then I will still honor you, Arthur said. You're wearing her pendant. You're a part of this, whether you want to be or not. I'll set up a trust. Your college, your apartment. You'll be safe. It was more than anyone had ever offered her, but it wasn't what she wanted. And what if I am? Arthur's voice broke. Then I get my daughter back. Ella nodded. Okay, I'll do it. The doctor was discreet and quick. A swab from Arthur, a swab from Ella. The samples were sealed, placed in a biometric lockbox, and taken away by the doctor. The next 24 hours were the longest of both their lives. Ella stayed at the penthouse, in a guest room larger than her entire apartment. She and Arthur ate dinner in silence, two strangers bound by a desperate hope. At 4:30 p.m. the next day, the doctor returned. He carried a single, sealed envelope. Arthur's hands were shaking so badly he couldn't open it. You, he said, handing it to Ella. She tore the seal. Her eyes scanned the technical jargon, lab numbers, genetic markers, and then the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. The words blurred. Ella read them again. And again, 0. Ella? Arthur asked, his voice tight. She couldn't speak. She just handed him the paper. He read it. His face didn't fall. It hardened. The hope that had softened his features vanished, replaced by the granite mask of the billionaire. I see, he said, his voice cold. It can't be right, Ella stammered. The pendant. Arthur, the pendant. The pendant, he interrupted, his voice laced with ice, is a very good copy. My mother was right. You are a very, very good con artist. No, I didn't. I thought, what did you think? That you could show up with a trinket and I'd hand you my name? My fortune? He was pacing now, the shark returning. You played on the grief of a man you've never met. It was a good try, admirable even. I'm not lying. I'm not. Tears streamed down her face. Get her out of here, Arthur said to his security guard. But the test, maybe they made a mistake. The Caduceus Bryant Clinic doesn't make mistakes, Miss Vance. They are the best. The numbers don't lie. You do. He turned his back on her, a signal that the meeting was over. Leave the pendant. It's the only thing you have that's worth anything. That was the line. The tears stopped. Ella's grief turned, hard and sharp, into rage. No, he turned. What? No, she said, her voice shaking but strong. You don't get this. This was my mother's. And whoever she was better than you. She was better than your battle-axe mother and your paid-off doctors. You want to believe I'm a con artist? Fine. It's easier than believing your whole life is a lie. She clutched the pendant. I'm not your daughter. I'm glad I'm not. I wouldn't want your blood. She turned and walked out, past the stunned guard, past Marcus Thorne, who was standing in the hall with a look of, was that pity? She didn't care. She walked out of the penthouse, out of the building, and back into the cold, uncaring city. Inside the penthouse, Arthur Sinclair sank into a chair, the paper clutched in his hand. He was, once again, completely and utterly alone. In the hallway, Marcus Thorne took out his phone. He made one call. It's done, he said to the person on the other end. The test was negative. He believes it. He listened for a moment. Yes, Mrs. Sinclair. The lab director at Caduceus Bryant is very cooperative. The original samples have been destroyed. The file is sealed. He hung up. Genevieve Sinclair had won. Ella's world didn't just crumble, it exploded. The rejection from Arthur was a physical pain, worse than any hunger or cold she'd ever felt. For 24 hours she had allowed herself to hope. She had imagined a family, a father, an identity. Now she had nothing. She was back in her tiny fifth-floor walk-up. The paid leave had been rescinded the moment she left the penthouse. Her job was gone. Her hope was gone. She tore her room apart, not in anger, but in a desperate, frantic search. She was looking for, she didn't even know, a clue, anything. She pulled out the one box she'd kept from her last foster home, the Ella box that contained every scrap of her life. It was mostly empty. Report cards, a dried flower, a participation trophy for a spelling bee, and at the very bottom, the baby blanket. It was a faded, pilled flannel, thin as a dish rag. The matron at St. Swithin's had told her she was found wrapped in it, the pendant pinned to the fabric. Ella had always hated it. It was proof of her abandonment. She clutched it, burying her face in the scentless fabric. She was about to throw it across the room when her fingers brushed against something inside the seam. A small, hard lump. Her fingers, clumsy with cold and adrenaline, fumbled with the old stitching. It was thick, as if sewn by an unsteady hand. She ripped the seam open. It wasn't a jewel, it wasn't money. It was a small, folded piece of tin foil. Inside the tin foil was a tiny, rolled-up piece of paper, brittle with age. It looked like a receipt. She carefully unrolled it. It was a hospital admission slip, not from a fancy private clinic, but from the St. Jude's charity ward, a place that had been torn down a decade ago. The date was October 25th, 2003. The patient's name, Isabella Vance. The admitting doctor, Dr. L. O'Connor. And at the bottom, scrawled in a weak, spidery hand, was a note. Tell Arthur. G knows. She was here. The pendant is the key. Don't let her win. Tell A. I love him. I love her. I.V. Ella dropped the paper as if it were on fire. G knows. Genevieve. The pendant is the key. It wasn't a copy. It was the pendant. The DNA test was a lie. Genevieve had been there. Her mother, Isabella, hadn't died in a car crash. She had been alive. She had given birth to her. She had been at St. Jude's. A new, cold fury replaced Ella's grief. This wasn't about a lost father anymore. This was about a stolen mother. Across town, Arthur Sinclair was drinking. It was 10:08 a.m. He was staring at the DNA report, 0.00%. It was so absolute. But a question, like a splinter, was working its way under his skin. How did she get the pendant? If she was a con artist, she would have needed to copy it. To do that, she would have needed a picture. He had destroyed every photo of Isabella. He'd burned them in a fit of grief 22 years ago. The only images were in his mind. There were no photos for a con artist to find. "Marcus!" he barked into his intercom. Marcus Thorne entered, his face a mask of professional concern. "Sir? Get me Giuseppe Bianchi, the jeweler in Florence, now." "Mr. Bianchi is 94 years old and retired, Arthur. It's the middle of the night in Italy." "Then wake him up." An hour later, a shaky, tinny voice was patched through the speakerphone. "Signor Sinclair, is that you? After all these years? Giuseppe, the locket, the Isabella's knot you made for me. Ah, la bellezza, a work of love. I broke the mold, just as you asked. Never another. A tragedy, what happened? Such a beautiful design. Gone forever." Arthur's blood turned to ice. "Giuseppe, be very sure. You broke the mold? You never made another? Not even a sketch?" "On my father's grave, signore. One set. For your Isabella. It was unique. A part of her soul, you said?" Arthur hung up the phone. He looked at Marcus, his eyes black. "The test was wrong," Arthur whispered. Marcus stiffened. "Arthur, the lab is infallible. The lab, Arthur snarled, is run by a man, Dr. Robert Bryant, a man who, if I recall, Sinclair Holdings bailed out of a very bad medical technology venture last year. Am I remembering that correctly, Marcus? Marcus Thorne did not move, but a bead of sweat formed on his temple. That was a standard investment. You, Arthur said, his voice deadly. You called my mother. You arranged the payoff. You tampered with the test. It wasn't a question. Marcus finally broke. He wouldn't meet Arthur's eyes. It was for the good of the company. For your own good. The girl, she is a disruption. Your mother, she commanded it. She said you were becoming unstable. Arthur swept his desk clear. Phones, computers, priceless artifacts, all of it crashed to the floor. Get out, he roared. Get out! You are done! Marcus fled. Arthur sank to his knees amidst the wreckage. He had been played by his mother, by his most trusted friend. He had looked his own daughter in the eye and called her a liar. He had to find her. Ella's world didn't just crumble, it exploded. The rejection from Arthur was a physical pain, a hollow, aching void, worse than any hunger or cold she'd ever felt. For a single 24-hour period, she had allowed herself the poisoned luxury of hope. She had imagined an identity, a family, a father. Now she had nothing. Less than nothing. She was back in her tiny fifth-floor walk-up, the air stale with the smell of her failure. The paid leave had been rescinded via a cold, two-line text message the moment she'd been thrown out of the penthouse. Her job was gone. Her hope was gone. She was a con artist, a liar, a 0.00%. For a full day, she didn't move. She lay on her thin mattress, staring at the water stains on her ceiling, clutching the pendant. It felt different now. Heavier. Cursed. It was a very good copy. A fake. Just like her. But on the second day, a different feeling crept in. Not grief, but a cold, hard rage. He was wrong. His mother was wrong. This pendant was the only real thing she had ever known. She had trusted it. She still trusted it. More than she trusted the billionaire and his infallible test. She tore her room apart, not in a search, but in a desperate, frantic purge. She was looking for... She didn't even know. An answer. A clue. Anything. She pulled out the one battered cardboard box she'd kept from her last foster home, the Ella box that contained every scrap of her 22 years. It was mostly empty. Brittle report cards, a dried brown flower from a high school dance, a plastic participation trophy for a spelling bee, and at the very bottom, wrapped in tissue, was the baby blanket. It was a faded, pilled flannel, thin as a dish rag. The matron at St. Swithin's had told her she was found wrapped in it, the pendant pinned to the fabric. Ella had always hated it. It was proof of her abandonment, a symbol of being unwanted. She snatched it up, ready to throw it into the trash to finally sever the last link. But as she clutched the wadded fabric, her fingers, raw from the cold, brushed against something inside the seam, a small, hard, flat lump. Her heart stopped. She had held this blanket 1,000 times, cried into it, but she had never. Her fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, fumbled with the old, thick stitching at the corner. It was sewn with a heavy, unsteady hand. She didn't have scissors. She used her teeth, tearing at the threads. The seam ripped open. It wasn't a jewel. It wasn't money. It was a small, folded piece of tin foil, blackened with age. A desperate, poor man's attempt at waterproofing. Inside the tinfoil was a tiny, rolled-up piece of paper, brittle and yellowed. It was a hospital admission slip, the blue and white carbon copy. Not from a fancy private clinic, but from the St. Jude's charity ward, a hospital that had been torn down a decade ago. The date was October 25th, 2003. The patient's name, printed by the admitting nurse, Isabella Vance, and at the bottom, in the patient notes section, was a weak, spidery, desperate scrawl in blue ink, a message from a dying hand. Tell Arthur. G knows. She was here. The pendant is the key. Don't let her win. Tell A. I love him. I love her. IV. Ella dropped the paper as if it were on fire. G knows. G.S. Genevieve Sinclair. The pendant is the key. It wasn't a copy. It was the pendant. The DNA test was a lie. The entire cold, sterile penthouse was a lie. Genevieve had been there. Her mother, Isabella, hadn't died in a car crash. She had been alive. She had been in a charity ward. She had given birth to her. And she had been terrified. A new, ice-cold fury replaced Ella's grief. This wasn't about a lost father anymore. This was about a stolen mother. Across town, Arthur Sinclair was in his own private hell. It was 10 a.m. and he was staring at his third glass of whiskey. The DNA report lay on his desk. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. It was so absolute. He had seen the proof and, like a fool, he had chosen to believe it. He had chosen to believe his mother's version of the world. That everyone was a con artist. That everyone was transactional. But a splinter, sharp and insistent, was working its way under his skin. The pendant. He had called Ella a con artist. But how? How did a broke, 22-year-old orphan in Brooklyn commission a perfect, one-of-a-kind replica of a piece of jewelry that no one had ever seen? He had destroyed every photo of Isabella. He'd burned them in a whiskey-fueled fit of grief 22 years ago, a week after her death. The only images were in his mind, the only other person who had seen it. "Get me Giuseppe Bianchi," he barked into his intercom. "The jeweler in Florence. Now." "Sir, it's 4:08 a.m. in Italy," his new assistant Amelia replied. "Then wake him up." An hour later, a shaky, tinny voice, heavy with sleep and age, was patched through the speakerphone. "Signor Sinclair? Is that you? Dio mio, after all these years. Giuseppe, the locket, the Isabella's knot you made for me." There was a soft sound of affection on the other end. "Ah, la bellezza. A work of love. I broke the mold just as you asked. Such a beautiful design. Gone forever. A tragedy. What happened to your Isabella? A tragedy." Arthur's blood turned to ice. "Giuseppe, be very, very sure. You broke the mold. You never made another. You never kept a sketch. A design? Signore," the old man's voice was suddenly full of offense, "I am an artist, and I am a man of my word. On my sainted father's grave, Signor Sinclair. One set. For your Isabella. It was unique, a part of her soul, you said." Arthur hung up the phone. He didn't say goodbye. The pendant was real. The girl was real. The test was the lie. "Amelia," he snarled, "get in here, now." Amelia, a quiet, hyper-efficient woman in her late 20s, entered, a tablet in hand. She had been Marcus Thorne's assistant, which meant she knew everything. "The test," Arthur said, his voice a low growl. "Caduceus Bryant Clinic. Who runs it?" "Dr. Robert Bryant, sir." "Bryant. Bryant. I know that name." Arthur was pacing, his mind, the shark's mind, finally clicking into gear. His medical tech venture. 2 years ago. It was failing. Sinclair Holdings, bailed him out. A charitable investment. My mother's idea. Amelia's face was pale. She didn't need to say anything. "It was Marcus," Arthur whispered. He was in the hall. He knew. He stalled me. He called my mother. "Mr. Thorne was very loyal to your mother, sir," Amelia said. her voice barely audible. He's gone. He cleared his office this morning. But his outgoing server files, they're still active until midnight. Amelia had been invisible, overlooked, and she had seen everything. "Show me," Arthur commanded. She didn't show him HR files. She showed him Marcus Thorne's private ledgers, the Fix-It files, and there, amongst payoffs to politicians and silenced journalists, was a 22-year-long string of payments. Annual donation to St. Swithin's Orphanage for their continued discretion. A one-time payoff to a witness for the 2003 accident report. A large one-time payment dated November 2003 to a Dr. L. O'Connor at St. Jude's Hospital. The memo, discretion. Dr. O'Connor, the name from Ella's hospital slip, the one she was, at this very moment, discovering. "Where is O'Connor now?" Arthur demanded. Amelia's fingers flew. Oh my, he died 2 years ago, sir. Pancreatic cancer." It was a dead end. Arthur slammed his fist on the desk. "No! His files. Doctors don't destroy files. Where are his patient records?" When he retired from his private practice, his archives were transferred to a secure, climate-controlled storage facility in Queens. "Get the car," Arthur said, grabbing his coat. "Sir, we'll need a court order. A warrant." "We," Arthur said, his eyes black, "are billionaires. We'll buy the storage facility." It took $200,000 in cash and a high-stakes legal threat to the night manager, but 2 hours later, Arthur Sinclair was in a cold, dusty locker, ripping open a box marked O'Connor, Private, 403. He found the file in minutes. Vance, Isabella. It was thin, a few intake forms, a blood-type report, and an audio memo cassette tape. Arthur had to send Amelia out to his driver's ancient car to find a tape deck. He sat on a metal stool in the freezing storage unit, under a single buzzing fluorescent light, and pressed play. Dr. O'Connor's voice, old, tired, and thick with guilt, filled the room. "Patient 45B, Isabella Vance, November 1st, 2003. Patient expired at 4 a.m. Cause, postpartum complications, exacerbated by, well, I'll call it neglect. I tried to get her transferred to a proper surgical wing. I was blocked. Genevieve Sinclair was here. She stood in the hallway, told me the girl was a charity case and not to be moved. She said the family would handle it. By the time I bypassed her, it was too late. The baby is fine, a healthy girl, but Mrs. Sinclair's social worker is here for her. It doesn't feel right. I'm keeping a copy of the baby's blood work. I don't know why. I pray God forgives me." Arthur collapsed against the shelves, the tape player slipping from his numb fingers. His mother hadn't just lied. She hadn't just faked an accident. She hadn't just stolen his child. She had murdered the woman he loved. She had stood in a hospital hallway and, with a word, let her die. Slowly and in pain. He was sitting in the dark, a hollow, guttural sound of grief tearing from his chest, when his phone rang. It was Amelia. "Sir, I found her. Ella. She's not at her apartment. She's at the front gate. The front gate of the Sinclair mansion, in Greenwich. Sir, I think she's here for your mother." Arthur stood up. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, white-hot lava. "Keep her on the phone," he said. "Stall the police. I'm on my way." The Sinclair mansion in Greenwich was not a home. It was a fortress of old money, a sprawling Georgian monolith of red brick and white marble, set on 200 acres of land designed to keep the world at bay. It was here that Genevieve Sinclair was in her element. The grand drawing room, overlooking the dormant rose gardens, was filled with the light, tinkling sounds of wealth, the clink of crystal on silver trays, the murmur of polite gossip, and the musical laughter of Genevieve herself. She was hosting the acquisitions committee for the new museum wing, a collection of women whose blood was as blue as the sapphires on their fingers. The gala, of course, will be the first Monday in May, Genevieve was saying, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. I've secured a final walk-through of the new Hellenistic gallery. She was interrupted by the quiet, urgent footsteps of Thomas, her head of household security, a man paid handsomely to be invisible. He leaned down, his face pale. Ma'am, I apologize for the interruption. There is a young woman at the front gate. Miss Eleanor Vance. She is insistent. Genevieve's smile remained, a perfect, painted-on porcelain mask, but her eyes, cold as the November sky, tightened at the edges. Vance. Insistent, she repeated, as if tasting a sour word. A new species of pest. She's not on any list. Have her removed. If she's trespassing, call the local police. They know what to do with obsessed fans. Thomas shifted, a cardinal sin in Genevieve's presence. Ma'am, that's the difficulty. She's not a fan. She said to tell you she's here about St. Jude's Hospital and a patient named Isabella. The room did not get colder, but it felt like it. The name, unspoken in this house for 22 years, hung in the air like an undetonated bomb. The ladies at the table, sensing a crack in the perfect facade, went silent, their curiosity piqued. What? Did you say? Genevieve's voice was a whisper of steel. St. Jude's, Mum. And Isabella. I heard you, Thomas. How dare she? Genevieve was about to order him to lock down the estate when a commotion came from the grand foyer, shouting, You can't go in there! Watch me! The double doors to the drawing room burst open, slammed back against the silk-papered walls by a small, furious figure. It was Ella. She was not the polished, terrified girl from the penthouse. This was a different person. Her hair was a mess from the wind. Her cheap denim jacket was damp from a long, cold walk from the train station, and her eyes, Isabella's green eyes, were burning with a righteous fire that stunned the room into silence. In her hand, she clutched a manila folder like a weapon. The ladies of the museum board gasped. This was not a fan. This was a spectre. Get her out, Genevieve hissed, rising from her chair, her face a mask of white rage. Thomas, remove her now. No, Ella said, her voice shaking but echoing in the cavernous room. I'm not leaving. Not until they, she gestured to the horrified committee. Hear what you are. You are a piece of street trash, a con artist. I should have had you arrested. I will have you arrested. For what? Ella cried, stepping forward, the folder held out like a shield. For trespassing, or for knowing the truth? For knowing what you did to my mother? Your mother, Genevieve spat, the word thick with venom, was a gutter snipe who tried to trap my son. She died. It was a tragedy of her own making. She didn't die in a car crash. Ella's voice dropped, but it cut through the room. She died in a charity ward. Because you left her there. She ripped the first paper from her folder. It was the copy of the St. Jude's admission slip. She threw it onto the table, scattering a plate of delicate, crustless sandwiches. Isabella Vance, admitted October 25th, 2003, in labor, malnourished, but alive. Genevieve lunged for the paper, but Ella was faster, pulling out the second. Baby girl Vance, born October 26th, healthy, discharged November 2nd. Ella's voice broke, but she forced the words out. Discharged to St. Swithin's Orphanage. And what's this note, Genevieve? A little handwritten note from the administrator? Per G.S. private arrangement. G.S. Genevieve Sinclair. Forgeries, Genevieve shrieked. All of it. You think these photocopies mean anything? You are nothing. You have no proof. But I do. The new voice was not Ella's. It was a deep, resonant baritone, paralyzed with a rage so cold it burned. Arthur Sinclair stood in the doorway. He was not the man who had called Ella a liar. The billionaire shark was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he had been hollowed out from the inside. His suit was rumpled, his tie was gone, and his face was a pale, sweating mask of absolute soul-deep fury. He didn't look at Ella. His eyes, a terrifying echo of hers, were locked on his mother. "Arthur!" Genevieve cried, a flicker of genuine panic in her eyes. "Thank God, this creature, she's insane. She broke in here. She's spouting the most horrific lies." Arthur walked slowly into the room. The museum board ladies looked like they were witnessing an execution. "He's dead, Mother," Arthur said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "What? Who's dead?" "Dr. O'Connor, the man whose life you ruined with a generous retirement package. The man you paid for discretion at St. Jude's. He died 2 years ago." "I don't know what you're talking about." "He left files, Mother," Arthur said, stopping 5 feet from her. "And in those files, he left a recording. He left his confession. He left your sin." He pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't bother with courtesies. He pressed play, and the volume was high enough to be heard in the gardens. The old, reedy, guilt-ridden voice of Dr. L. O'Connor filled the opulent drawing room. "Patient 45B, Isabella Vance, November 1st, 2003. Patient expired at 4:00 a.m. Ella let out a sound, a half sob, half gasp, and put her hand over her mouth. "Cause postpartum complications, exacerbated by, well, I'll call it neglect. I tried to get her transferred to a proper surgical wing. I was blocked." Genevieve was shaking her head, backing away. No. Genevieve Sinclair was here. She stood in the hallway, told me the girl was a charity case, and not to be moved. She said the family would handle it. By the time I bypassed her, it was too late. Arthur's hand was shaking so violently, he almost dropped the phone. "The baby is fine, a healthy girl, but Mrs. Sinclair's social worker is here for her. It doesn't feel right. I pray God forgives me." The audio clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. One of the museum ladies, a Mrs. Vanderbilt Cohen, let out a small, horrified whimper. "You," Arthur whispered, "you didn't just lie to me. You didn't just steal my child." His voice cracked, and the rage finally broke through, a raw, primal roar of grief. "You murdered her. You stood in that hallway and you let her die. For what? For this? For silver teacups?" The mask of Genevieve Sinclair did not just crack, it atomized. The terror in her eyes was replaced by something far uglier, the cornered, hateful snarl of a predator. "Yes," she shrieked, the sound ripping from her throat. "For this, for all of this, for the name, for the legacy, for the bloodline that she pointed a trembling, jeweled finger at the memory of Isabella, was going to pollute. She was my family," Arthur roared back. "She was a parasite, a grasping, penniless, no-talent artist who saw a weak-willed boy and sank her claws in. She would have ruined you, ruined us. I did what I had to do, what you were too weak to do." She turned her venom on Ella. "And you are the ghost of her mistake. You should have vanished. I should have had O'Connor." She stopped, but it was too late. The admission was complete. "You should have what, Mother?" Arthur's voice was ice. "Had him dispose of her, like you disposed of her mother?" He held up his other hand. His phone was still in it. The red REC light was still on. "You've been recording." Genevieve's eyes went wide. "Every word," Arthur said. "And I think I think the police will find this, and Dr. O'Connor's memo, very interesting." "You wouldn't," Genevieve breathed. "I am your mother." "You were," Arthur corrected. "You are the woman who murdered the love of my life and abandoned my daughter." He looked past her, to Thomas, the security guard, who was frozen by the door. "Thomas, call the Greenwich police. Tell them my mother has just confessed to the negligent homicide of Isabella Vance and the kidnapping of Eleanor Vance. Tell them to hurry." "You traitor!" Genevieve screamed. "You ungrateful!" Her eyes, wild and hateful, darted from Arthur, the son who had betrayed her, to Ella, the girl who had caused it all. With a high-pitched, animalistic shriek, she lunged, not at Arthur, at Ella. Her hands were clawed, aiming for her face, for her eyes. "You!" But Arthur was faster. He had been waiting for this. He stepped between them, taking the brunt of his mother's attack. He grabbed her wrists, his grip like iron. The woman who had ruled his life with a whisper was frail, brittle, and pathetic in his grasp. "No," he said, his voice breaking with 22 years of sorrow. "Not again. You will never touch my family again." The wail of sirens, faint and then suddenly, terribly loud, cut through the afternoon air. Amelia, his assistant, had made the call the moment he'd left the city, anticipating this exact outcome. The museum board ladies were huddled by the fireplace, a tableau of horrified silk. As two uniformed officers, their faces grim, walked into the opulent room, Genevieve Sinclair finally, completely, collapsed. She didn't fight. She just sobbed, her perfect coiffure coming undone. "You have destroyed everything," she wept, as they put the handcuffs on her, the click of the metal echoing in the silent room. "No, Mother," Arthur said, his back to her. "You did. 22 years ago." He didn't watch them lead her away. He was looking at Ella, who was standing by the table of ruined food, shaking so hard she looked like she might fall. The papers from her folder were scattered all over the floor, the proof she had fought so hard for. The drawing room was a wreck. The guests filed out, silent, not meeting his eye. The house, his childhood home, was silent, save for the sound of his mother's distant, fading sobs. He and Ella were alone. The rage was gone. The adrenaline was gone. All that was left was the vast, echoing emptiness of 2 decades. I called you a liar," Arthur whispered. His voice was raw. "You were lied to," Ella whispered back. She clutched the pendant around her neck. "I called you a con artist, in my own home." He took a step toward her. I looked at my own daughter, and I threw her out. I said I was glad I wasn't your daughter." A heavy, painful silence settled between them. He looked at the pendant. "Isabella's not," he murmured. He reached into his own coat, into the hidden breast pocket, and pulled out the locket he had carried every day for 22 years. The other half. I never took it off. He didn't try to hug her. He didn't ask for forgiveness. The chasm between them was too wide, filled with too much pain. He just stood there, looking at her, really looking at her. He saw Isabella's defiant chin. He saw her green eyes, now flooded with tears. But he also saw strength that was all her own, the strength of a survivor. "She had your eyes," he finally choked out. "I know," Ella said, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her face. "I'm glad. The fight was over. The villain was gone." But the story wasn't. Arthur looked at the small, trembling woman who was his daughter. He took off his $10,000 suit jacket, and, in the first truly fatherly act of his life, He draped it over her shoulders. It was massive, warm, and smelled of sandalwood and loss. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice thick. "This house. It's a tomb." Ella nodded, pulling the jacket tighter. She looked at the door and then back at him. She had spent her life searching for a past. He had spent his haunted by it. Together, for the first time, they turned and walked away from it, taking the first tentative steps toward an unknown and terrifying future. From a spilled glass of water to the downfall of an empire, Ella's story proves that the past never truly stays buried. A 22-year-old lie, built by a mother's cruelty, was unraveled by a daughter's resilience, and the one thing the matriarch couldn't destroy, a mother's love, immortalized in a simple silver pendant. Ella didn't just find her father, she found her mother's justice. What did you think of Ella's incredible journey and Genevieve's shocking betrayal? Do you believe people can truly change, or was Arthur's cruelty just as bad as his mother's? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If this story of drama, mystery, and resilience touched your heart, please show your support. Like this video, share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more dramatic tales every single week. We appreciate every one of you.